All right, everybody, we'll go ahead and get the demo day started here and kick things off with what we're talking about, which is NDAs here today. And here at Pipefi, we know legal teams can sometimes be, I don't know if ignored is the right word from an IT perspective, but their processes aren't always the ones that are top of mind. So want to start by kind of giving a state of affairs for IT in general. And this is going to be presented by me, Nick Sowers. I'm an AE at Pipefi. I've been working in collaboration tool sales for about 4 years. So for some of you legal people who have been doing legal review or practicing law for longer than 4 years, please don't roll your eyes at me. Thank you. But as far as the current state of affairs for a lot of companies that we work with, you'll see a chart up here that basically goes through how many different applications are being used across an organization over time. And this is from Okta Business at Work in 2020. And basically what this is meant to illustrate is most organizations, regardless of industry, are using somewhere between probably 50 to potentially 200 different types of software applications within an organization. And what that means is IT is I don't know if losing control is the right word, but there's a lot of things to manage, right? So between, marketing, sales, finance, HR, legal, there are only so many things that an IT team can get to. And so where Pipefi kind of sits in this ecosystem is we're trying to take a little bit of the load off of IT and trying to empower business process owners. Because in the past, the first wave of digital transformation has been driven primarily by IT. So if you think about a lot of the projects that have been underway at your organization over the last couple of years, things like moving from an on-prem solution into the cloud, or moving from Outlook to O365, some of those enterprise-driven projects have mostly been championed and pioneered by the IT department. And we're now moving into a phase that's been accelerated a lot by COVID-19 and kind of forcing people to work remotely, work disparately, and kind of essentially work with their teams online. The lines of business now are starting to say, hey, these are the types of things that my team needs from a software perspective to get their job done, because we can't always just handle those things in person. So we're moving into a place where a lot of the digital transformation that's going to happen now, you can call it phase two, phase three, et cetera, are going to be driven by business process leaders, business process owners, or more or less people who have a bias towards action and getting things done within their organization. And despite that kind of happening, what we're typically seeing is there's a chasm between solutions that are available. And this kind of illustrates where a lot of organizations are, where they're kind of those simple tools that are used by business right now. And on the right-hand side of things, you'll see these are the tools that are typically used by IT. On the left-hand side, they're usually easy to use, very user-friendly, and they can kind of scale within, a department or maybe two or three departments. On the right-hand side, the tools you'll typically see here, the ServiceNows, the Pega systems, et cetera, are going to be large, compliance-oriented tools that IT is basically trying to archetype to fit the business needs as best they can and create rules and guardrails in place for a lot of organizations. A lot of times those aren't going to be systems that are going to be built by the end user. The person in legal isn't necessarily going to build a module inside of ServiceNow as much as they may build a workflow inside of something like Monday. So my MC here, Kristen, is going to post a poll in the post a question in the poll section to see if these are some of the tools that your team might be leveraging today, whether it's on the left-hand side here, something that's simple and easy to use, or potentially, using something that's maybe a little bit more difficult to use from, the ServiceNow Pega system side of things, right? And don't worry if you aren't. That probably means you might be doing a lot of your workflows via spreadsheets, via email, Slack, Microsoft Teams, etc. A ton of organizations are still in that spot too. And they're a lot of times looking at ways, hey, how can I start to get out of those spreadsheets and potentially into something that's a little bit more automated, right? So where does Pipefi come in, and how do we kind of fix this problem, right? Here at Pipefi, we're really trying to bridge the gap between the business process owners and the IT resources. And the reason for that is because based on what I've been talking about, kind of the current state of affairs, right? IT resources are typically strained inside of the organization, and they're working on projects that have typically been prioritized by the CIO department, right? Like these are typically going to be the things that more or less are going to be driving the most revenue for the organization, right? Now, from a legal perspective, reviewing contracts, getting NDA signed, help keep the business going, but it doesn't always catch the eye of the CIO to be the thing that we need to do because, we've already invested in a legal team, like, they kind of have their process down, right? That's what they assume, but it isn't always the case. There is a better way to do things. So after you're kind of bringing in a tool that can kind of bridge that gap like Pipefi, what IT is trying to do is shift the mindset from IT controls everything to IT can help empower those business unit leaders, right? And what that allows the business to do is make changes at a business pace. So a great example of this from a legal department would be, maybe we need we only allow for red lines of contracts over 100K. We're a small team. We can't necessarily look at every contract that's under 100K because our time is valuable and we have other contracts that may take priority. As the team grows, we may want to move that threshold to potentially something like a $50,000 threshold, right? Before bringing in a tool where legal would be able to make that change on their own, they'd have to open up a ticket with IT. And IT might have, a backlog. They might be running a sprint. They may not be able to get to that in, 3 to 6 to maybe even 9 months to a year, right? At Pipefi, we think that the team that's overseeing legal, maybe the finance, CFO, et cetera, they should be able to make that change almost instantaneously. So you'll hear a lot of this no code and citizen development as I keep moving forward in the presentation here. But really what this is about is empowering non-technical employees to drive innovation inside the organization. And for us, we want to kind of bridge that chasm that I showed in the last slide. So you can have a tool that's agile and user-friendly enough for you to feel comfortable using, but also has enough governance in play that IT feels comfortable with connecting into the current ecosystem that you're using and follows business rules from a data and compliance standpoint, right? And I do believe we may have another poll question here.
We do. I'm figuring out how to get to the next poll. Oh, here we go. And it's really about, are you partnering with IT to kind of solve some of these process challenges you might be facing? Looks like IT, not yet. Well, for one group, yes.
And that's okay, right? Like we're still very early in the development cycle, right? So for those of you who have kind of a leg up, great. For those of you who don't, you'll get there eventually. So the next question is why do we want to start to optimize your NDA process or any legal process for that matter? And we have a nice quote here from Deloitte that's essentially saying looking forward to general counsels and their teams are developing or refining their strategies to align with the strategies of their organizations and adapting their operational models. A key enabler of this transformation is making use of advances in technology to maximize efficiency, reduce cost, and free lawyers time to work more closely with the organization as a trusted partner, right? So for anybody who has a sales org that's growing, customers have, we want an NDA signed. We want to have them use our NDA, right? Like we want to try to be able to create some sort of workflow where something like an NDA getting signed can be something that's set up as a self-service type portal for a sales org to come in, have some input and get that NDA back, as opposed to pinging somebody in legal via email, Slack, Skype, Teams, etc., and kind of waiting for a response. Like ultimately, like we want to be agile, we want to be quick in how we're delivering things back to our customers, right? And I work in sales, and one of the things I've always been told growing up is time kills all deals, right? So we do want to try and remove barriers for our team, but also make sure that they're following our legal guidelines, right? So what this can allow us to do is free the legal department to focus their efforts on larger strategic initiatives, right? Things like GDPR compliance, data privacy, et cetera. Like those are just a little bit more higher priority than potentially reviewing an NDA or sending out a standard NDA to a customer where a sales rep could hypothetically do that. And ultimately, that's going to create a stronger relationship, not only with the legal team internally, but also with the departments that they're working with, and also start to create a better relationship with prospects and with customers and partners who are all kind of seeing like, look, this team is getting things turned around so quickly. That's putting a lot of pressure on the external facing client to potentially match that speed, right? So this is an illustration of how a manual NDA process might work inside of your organization today. You'll kind of see at the top here, sales rep, they send a request in, you're seeing email, maybe a message that might be getting tracked on a spreadsheet. That spreadsheet may have various columns that are hopefully updated by someone, right? And what can happen when you're using a spreadsheet, you don't always have a log of who's potentially updated that status, maybe a miss a cell. And that kind of just creates poor communication loops, right? So it's not necessarily ideal. And a lot of times that's when, from a legal perspective, you might not be getting hit up by the sales rep who had initially asked you for something, but now a sales manager is kind of coming in over the top and saying, hey, what's going on here? We need this tomorrow, or we need this yesterday, right? Like, I can't tell you how many situations I've been in like that. And it just puts the team in an awkward position, right? Because we're all trying to do our best to update some of that information, but when you're using kind of tools that don't do a great job of auditing things or providing feedback back to a team that might be requesting something, that can get tough, right? So I think we might be getting ready for our next question. I think this is between moving from this slide to our next slide, is how many NDAs or legal docs do you typically kind of review, maybe within a quarter or a year? So please feel free to enter in some information here to kind of help give us a feel for what the team's workload looks like. Cool. So it looks like we're between 10 and 100, pretty big range. So I'm kind of going to keep moving here. So going back to what I was talking about with a citizen developer or this whole no code notion, right? So what you're going to start to see from a technology perspective in the next 12 to 24 to 36 months is this whole power to the people, right? Power to the business process owners. And the IT people are going to call those business process owners a citizen developer. And that's essentially a non-technical user who can create a new business application to address their organization's need and do so without necessarily knowing how to code. And who are those people? They are the people inside of our organization who are tech savvy, not just code savvy. The two are different. They understand their systems and how the processes should work internally. They're focused on aligning agile solutions. They are operationally oriented and they want things to kind of be standardized to make sure that it's not only scalable, but also repeatable, and the different stakeholders that we're working with are happy with that process and they want to make it better. And they don't just always sit with IT now. Sometimes they are sitting in our line of business units, and we want to empower those people to take on those challenges because a lot of times that's the sort of thing that motivates them from a business perspective, right? And what we think that the impact of citizen development is for a lot of organizations is it's going to make the business just better as a whole, right? Like we're going to see people who are working inside of organizations who are operating more efficiently. They're going to be able to take on more work and responsibilities and ultimately get more things done inside of the organization and make the organization run better. And what we're hearing from people like Gartner, Deloitte, et cetera, is that within the next 2 to 3 years, 70% of new app development will use low code or no code technologies and create a strategic advantage for them from a technological perspective. And where Pipefi kind of sits within this spectrum is you may have tools that you're already using, right? So You may be using something like a DocuSign to route some of your documents. You may have a CRM in place that has a lot of your customer data, right? And I'm going to show you a workflow here in a second that kind of goes through how some sort of trigger can basically get an NDA routed to somebody using DocuSign without necessarily having to load up a document, edit the fields that we need for who the contact is, title, date, all that good stuff. We're basically looking at that NDA process as what you're seeing right here, something that might start inside of a CRM. Customer sales rep clicks on, I need an NDA for this document. They might click a button inside of your CRM, HubSpot, Salesforce, we integrate with both of those. And what may happen at some point is that eventually moves into a vertical application. That's a tool that's brought in to do a specific job, like DocuSign. That's our eDoc system of choice. We do also work with electronic signature platforms like PandaDocs, EchoSign, HelloSign, etc. And for anything in between, the long tail process, how it manifests itself is the dreaded spreadsheet, email, Slack, Teams, Skype communications, creates a lack of visibility, not a lot of SLAs, and kind of manual work and rework, and that back and forth that happens of where is this or who's on this, right? And Pipefi is essentially something that sits on top of that as a system of engagement, right? And I like to think of Pipefi as working in inputs, right? So something that's going to trigger an action. Again, you'll see that here, Salesforce, HubSpot, Oracle, and we'll kind of get into the middle of that, be able to manage the middle of that, and I'll show you what that looks like, and ultimately deliver something, right? Like close a process loop. That might be getting an NDA signed, might be getting an MSA finalized so we can close out on a large contract to end the quarter, right? And ultimately, we do want to give people an overview of how much is this happening, how quickly is our team responding. So from a leadership perspective, we have dashboards, we have some governance and control, and we can start to see like how much work our team is taking on. And ultimately, do we need more headcount, or can we potentially put our time and energy into something else because we kind of have a good handle of what's going on here. And what we kind of see as the Pipefi difference is it makes a lot of these key stakeholders here a lot easier to work with, right? So the sales rep can focus a lot more on their sales process than some of the internal things that they may have to do to like get an NDA signed or start the redlining process for an MSA, or potentially looking over, GDPR docs or privacy shield information, right? Like those are all things that a legal team may have to look at, and a sales rep is constantly asking for. From a VP of legal affairs, the person who may be overseeing your legal department, they're typically going to be happier because they don't have people coming in over the top saying, I need this yesterday, right? Like we understand that. A lot of legal teams can be put in a hard position because sales reps, like myself, we can be kind of demanding sometimes. And it's not because we're jerks. It's because we're trying to push things forward, right? And the legal team in general, like they usually feel better because they have a software system that's working to reduce some of the manual work that they have to do to send a follow-up that, hey, yeah, we did receive this, or update a status, right? Or send something that should be as rudimentary as an NDA, right? There aren't a lot of legal people who take, they enjoy creating an NDA, right? So something that simple should be able to be executed using software. And a sales manager feels better because he's not coming over the top anymore, right? So I'm going to skip through a lot of these slides. I talked a little bit about some of the integrations that we have now, and I'm going to move on to a demo of how our NDA process works. But if you do have questions, please leave them in the question box, and I will try and get through those as I go through our NDA process. So thank you for that. So what you're seeing right here is kind of your standard Pipefi instance, right? So if you have tasks, what tasks are you working on? The pipes that you're a part of here. So for this particular one, I'm going to look at our NDA pipe, right? So I can come in here and I can see the stages that we've created for managing this process. So this is pretty rudimentary here. So we just have we call them cards, but they're basically contracts that come in. First thing that happens is they go into legal review, right? So when I click on a card here, you'll notice on the left-hand side, I essentially have, sorry, hold on here. On the left-hand side, I have the information from the card, right? So what had initially triggered this? What is the person looking for? What's the date, company? What's the contact's email address, title, address, etc. Like all the things we need to do to execute on that particular contract. If I needed to assign somebody to this, I would be able to kind of go through here and say, hey, who is my legal team, right? And go ahead and assign Billy to this. And again, what type of label do we want to put on this from a tracking perspective? Because when I go back inside of here, I can actually start to see, are we reviewing a third-party document? Is this an internal document at Pipefi? And, more or less, if we have a queue of 15 or 20 going on at a time, how can I start to see or visualize the difference between some of the types of documents we might be looking at, right? So you'll see a lot of these fields completely customizable. And when I talk about no code, right? Somebody who's non-technical could come in here and say, hey, I want an attachment field here. I could come in and say, please attach signed NDA, right? And that potentially could be something that's automated. I can mark this field as required. So somebody would have to do this to move this into the signed NDA field, which you'll see up here. Could potentially add a description. Pretty straightforward. I don't think this one needs one. I can also say this field is editable in other phases, but I could also turn this off. So once this document is attached, it cannot be removed unless it's an admin inside the system, right? And now I'm going to move into an actual workflow of requesting an NDA because I actually think that's where the magic happens. So I'm going to move into our portals here. And portals is something that, again, somebody could set up using a no-code interface, right? But I'm going to show you what this looks like. So Unifeed Bake Company, my good friend Joe Ham built this for us. He is also a sales rep here at Pipefi. And basically, we can stand up an instance that could sit in a company intranet that allows the sales rep to submit requests to our legal team. So almost like a ticketing system, but our legal team may have set this up ourselves. You'll see we've got a couple different things we can request for. Maybe we're doing a security review. In this case, we are doing an NDA. I can click on the NDA request here. I can create a record. Now I've done this before, so I'm actually auto-populated inside of here. Nick Sowers, he's the employee. Now I'm requesting a standard NDA. So this means this workflow should be as automated as possible. There's not going to be any red lines. I just need to get our document and route this to our customer. I want to give today's date because this is the date I'm hoping the customer signs it. Company name. I'm going to go ahead and put in Acme here, a Looney Tunes fan. Contact's email address. I'm going to use my own because I want to show you how quickly this can happen. Name, Nicholas Sowers. Title, I'll put manager. One day I might be that. And as we continue down here, address. So what am I typically going to do? I can go ahead and submit this. And again, fill in your email so I can actually track the progress of this request once I've submitted it. So I'm going to go through here and click submit. And it's going to say, check my email to essentially see, has Pipefi picked up this request, right? So I'm going to go through here, submit another response. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go into my email and I should have a nice DocuSign coming in eventually. And if you want to see what a request tracker looks like, I actually have the ability to access this request. And this is actually going to show me some of the information here that I've basically submitted, right? So I have my standard request here name. This is everything I've entered in. And now you'll see I actually have a DocuSign living inside of my account. Now it says Joe Ham sent this, but that's because based on the automation that we've created, this is the person in our legal department who might be reviewing this. I can come in here and review this. And this will load our standard NDA here. And you'll notice the fields I have here at the bottom of this document are going to be the fields that I had entered in. Nicholas Sowers, manager, sign, finish. No thanks. Now I will get routed the document for me to now countersign because wouldn't you know it, I also put myself in as the person who should finalize this document. I can come through here, same idea. All of that information is pre-populated based on me being the countersigner. Go ahead and finish this off. And eventually Pipefi will then pick that up. And I can move back into my NDA pipe here. And you'll see this is still an NDA sent. It'll take a couple minutes to pick up. But eventually, once this is signed, we'll have all of the information and the audit log here. So you actually have the signed document sitting here. If you're using some sort of document storage system, like a Dropbox, Box, etc., this could potentially push into that system as well, using some automation or integration rules that we have set up. So pretty slick there. That's probably most of what I wanted to go through today. But you can imagine if you were doing a non-standard NDA or you were potentially doing an MSA or reviewing some privacy shield documents, there could potentially be some additional stages here. It's really easy to build those stages out. You know, maybe I want to do red line 1, right? I can go ahead and I can create that stage. And once I move a card into this stage, I can basically customize all of the questions or things that might happen in this redlining stage. So if I wanted to have a long text of, you know, objections, I could leave those objections here. And I could pass back, you know, somebody didn't want to look at auto renew. Somebody's terms, payment terms wanted to be net 60 instead of net 30. We don't typically do that. We can leave all those comments here and actually shoot those comments using automation back to the sales rep, right? So again, we're creating those feedback loops in real time without necessarily having to have a meeting. Like we're doing our job or redlining the contract. Here's where we kind of see some red flags. And again, make that process better, make it more automated. And that's probably where I want to stop today. If there are any questions, please feel free to drop them in now. And let me see here, Greg, I saw you had a question here. Are document authoring tools integrated into Pipefi? From a document authoring, I assume you mean, you know, maybe like a Microsoft Word or a Google Docs. Like that's typically how we see contracts coming in. The short answer there is yes, like you can push and pull those documents into Pipefi. If there's another one, I would probably need to have a call with you separately to kind of go through what you might be looking at. And if that's something we have Keylogics, might have to check with our SD team on that. I haven't heard of that one myself. And then I have another question here. What about security and permissions? When we are getting legal documents processed, we need certain people to have edit access, view access. It's a great question. So when I'm looking at this pipe, I'm an admin in this particular pipe, so I have access to this. But you can gate who actually has access to come into this pipe and even view anything. So if you want to have all of your sales reps as members inside of Pipefi, but you don't want to have them to have access to this pipe, they wouldn't even know it existed, or they wouldn't even know that this pipe had cards. So there's not necessarily any way for them to come in and see things they shouldn't see. So those basic permissions do exist, but we are pretty short on time here. We have about a minute left. Hopefully you learned something about Pipefi today. Hopefully you learned something about potentially being able to automate your NDA process, whether it's using Pipefi or something else. And hopefully your processes get a little better in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick, and thanks everyone for attending. We appreciate your attention, and we will be sending out the recording to everyone who registered. So thanks for joining today, and hope everyone has a great rest of your day.